The two of them met up in the 1984 NCAA championship matchup when Ewing's Georgetown Hoyas beat Akeem, as he was known then, not Hakeem. They beat Houston 84-75. And obviously the two went back-to-back as number one picks in 84 and 85 as well. So there was quite a bit of history between these two and quite a bit of importance on this matchup that would help define the competitive relationship between the two as well.
And you are in Australia right now.
You're talking NBA basketball. You're talking great teams. You're talking great individual players.
Takes it off, and there's number 23, and of course Johnny goes nuts.
So we're all getting goosebumps thinking about it now.
I just tried to go out there and play my game.
I have no idea what you're talking about, Adam. I don't like anybody. I'm not a people person.
Grant, you make the pass. Yes. Christian, can you catch the ball? Yes.
All the stars were aligned and all the muscles fired at the right time, and I was able to get off the ground and throw one down.
I was saving that as a surprise for you.
And now, introducing your host for In All Airness, Adam Ryan.
Welcome to episode 139. Thanks for joining me. I'm happy to welcome my new mate, Jared Prosser, to the show. Today is part one of our discussion of the 1994 NBA Finals between the New York Knicks and Houston Rockets. We also dissect the history between Patrick Ewing and Akeem Olajuwon, comment on the 1994 regular season, and much more. The episode features audio snippets to add even greater context. Please note that the conversation was recorded before the shock passing of Hall of Fame great Dikembe Mutombo, September 30. Rest in peace, Mount Mutombo. And before Carl Anthony was moving towns, traded from Minnesota to New York, October 2. Show notes for this episode and access to a huge archive of past episodes are available at inallairness.com. Now, on to the show. I'd like to welcome a new friend to the show today. I'm joined by Jared Prosser. Welcome, Jared. How are you today, mate?
Doing well, Adam. Very, very happy to be a new friend of the pod. Delighted to be a part of it all. Thanks for having me.
No worries at all. A few weeks ago, I put out a call on my Twitter or my X timeline to see who was interested in chatting about some NBA history. You answered the call, and one of your suggestions was the 1994 NBA Finals. So I was thrilled to, first of all, hear from you and then see that you were keen to chat about the 94 Finals. Now, before we get into breaking down the season in general leading up to those finals, you're a broadcaster associated with NBL 1.
I'm a basketball lifer. My family have been involved since the 50s, so I've quite literally grown up with a basketball in my hand.
Wow.
Played in the old VBA in the 90s before I realised that my body was made of biscuits and it all fell apart. I've been a coach everything through from juniors through to representative, a skills coach. I've been an advanced scout for a VBL side. As you mentioned, I currently do a fair bit of media work. I broadcast for NBL 1. Geez, I've done probably about 1,000 or so articles for various publications, Footyology, Vendetta, Inside Sport, and so on, as well as podcasts and video series breaking down X's and O's. Basketball, it's in the blood, an omnipresent thing in my life. It's always good to talk hoops.
Fantastic, mate. Great to hear your background there. Obviously, you're a massive hoops head, and based on the amount of research that you've done and note-taking in advance of our chat today, you might have even gone above and beyond my usual standards. So well done on that.
I'm also a basketball nerd, so it kind of came naturally.
The 1994 Finals, of course, the New York Knicks and the Houston Rockets, Patrick Ewing and Akeem Olajuwon, but their history against one another actually began before they entered the NBA, links going back a good decade or more from 1994.
It's a confrontation we've been waiting for. The bruising battle of the big men for the 1984 National Championship. For Georgetown, the power centers on Patrick Ewing, the dominating heart of the Hoya attack. But if anything, Ewing is even more intimidating on defense, and because of him, Georgetown's opponents drive to the basket at their own peril. But tonight, Ewing is up against a foe worthy of his steel. Houston star center Akeem Olajuwon. Akeem and Ewing are without question the two most powerful big men in college basketball. And in a few moments, they will be going at each other off the board for the first time ever, with nothing less than a national title at stake.
We could probably delve into the 94 season. This was a season of transition for the league. On a logistical front, The Bulls were leaving Chicago Stadium. The Cavaliers were leaving Richfield Coliseum. The Spurs moved into the Alamo Dome. We saw quite a few eras ending as well. We had Dominique Wilkins traded to the Clippers for Danny Manning, which signaled the end of that really exciting Neek, Kevin Willis, and possibly John Koncak, he says sarcastically, Hawks era. We also saw Zeke, Isaiah Thomas, Terry's Achilles and retire. Lambier retired. Dennis Rodman was traded. So we effectively saw the death of the bad boys. The Lakers and Celtics, they missed the playoffs. The first season in league history that both of those sides had missed the playoffs in the same season. But of course, we're burying the lead. Michael Jordan, 3-time champion, 3-time finals MVP, reigning finals MVP. He retired in sudden and somewhat 30-odd years later, still very murky circumstances.
A breaking story here. The Chicago Bulls have called a press conference for tomorrow morning, and there's high speculation and report that Michael Jordan will retire from basketball forever. As you know, Michael threw out the first pitch tonight. His father passed away, allegedly murdered this summer. Jim Gray has been following the story with us tonight. You spoke to Bulls owner Jerry Reinsdorf.
Yeah, I just spoke to Jerry up in his box, and Michael very hurriedly just left the ballpark when circulation of this story began. Jerry Reinsdorf said that he would not confirm the story. I said, by not confirming it, Jerry, does that not lend credence? Jerry went on to say, well, maybe it does, but we won't have anything official to say until tomorrow morning.
That led to the discussion of who was going to step in as the new best player in the league. Would it be Clyde Drexler? Would it be David Robinson, Shaquille O'Neal? And of course, Patrick Ewing and Hakeem Olajuwon were front and center of that conversation as well. You touched on their history, Adam. The two of them met up in the 1984 NCAA championship matchup when Ewing's Georgetown Hoyas beat Hakeem, as he was known then, not Hakeem. They beat Houston 84-75. And obviously the two went back-to-back as number one picks in 84 and 85 as well. So there was quite a bit of history between these two and quite a bit of importance on this matchup that would help define the competitive relationship between the two as well.
Absolutely. And I love a good John Koncak mention. Don't think I didn't enjoy that one. That's a great summation of what was happening at this time in league history back in 1994. The two big men go back to their college days. They were both juniors when they met in Seattle, Washington. In terms of the overall 1994 season, bit of context here as well for our listener. New York opened their 94 campaign with 7 straight wins. They were 36-19 through February, prior to reeling off 15 straight wins, and then they finished the regular season Atlantic Division champs at 57-25. In round 1 of the playoffs, they cut down New Jersey's Nets in 4 games. They ousted the back-to-back champs, Chicago, as you mentioned there, in 7 games. Just a quick moment of silence, please, for the Bulls elimination there. And then they outpaced Indiana in the East Finals, which was another 7-game slog. A quick sidebar, I headed overseas to America in 94. I was on an NBA tour, and I got to see the Knicks play against the 76ers at Madison Square Garden, which was pretty awesome regular season game. I was there a few months before the finals, and the whole go New York, go New York, go was almost at its height at that time as well, if you remember that famous catch cry.
We are the New York Knicks. Go New York, go New York, go. Go New York, go New York, go. Say go New York, go New York, go.
Funnily enough, I was in the States in 94 as well, but it was just after the NBA Finals, maybe 3 or 4 weeks after. I was there for the World Cup. Just on the go New York, go New York, go. This was the season where the Houston Chronicle, after Houston went down 2-0 to Phoenix in round 2, they put out their famous or infamous Choke City headline as well. So there was a famous New York chant, but a rather infamous one that came from the other side of this matchup.
Great to see that you've been combing through the NBA history there, mate, to bring up that sort of stuff.
Like I said, NBA nerd, Adam.
Now, just in relation to Houston, here on my notes, Houston rocketed, I'm sorry about that, atop the NBA with 15 straight wins to open the season. Their first loss was December 3 at Atlanta. They then won their next 7 games before drifting back to earth somewhat, going 36-23 to end the regular season at 58-24, and they were the Midwest Division champs. The Rockets eliminated Portland in round 1. In the West semis, they lost games 1 and 2 at home versus Phoenix, as you just mentioned, before winning 4 of 5 to eclipse the Suns in 7 games. And then Houston detuned the Jazz pre-recording, mate, I'm sorry. I did say I wasn't going to talk about the Jazz, but that's your team. They detuned the Jazz in the West Finals.
I'm more than happy for you to mention the Jazz.
Gentleman's sweep of Utah, 4-1. Interesting little side note here. I mentioned the Rockets' incredible start to the season. The 1970 Knicks, who would go on to win the NBA title, and the 1994 Rockets are tied for second all-time for most wins through 23 games. They both were 22-1. The Knicks won the title in 1970. Would that happen in 1994? Well, the 2016 Warriors opened the season with 24 straight wins in terms of the best start to an NBA season. Those stats are courtesy of StatHead via Basketball Reference.
Nice little bit of synergy with this playoffs as well for the Knicks and Rockets. And I didn't realise this coming in. It wasn't until I was doing a bit of research, Adam, but both teams came in as a 2 seed, which I was sort of vaguely aware of. But they both took the same path to the finals, beating a 7th seed, obviously, in round 1, then taking down a 3 seed, then a 5 seed in the conference finals. It's a rare path to take a 7-3-5, but to see it happen in the same season on both conferences, I haven't done the research to know whether that's a complete once-off, but, geez, it'd have to be close to it, wouldn't it?
Certainly sounds like it's a rarity, to say the least. I also actually noticed a couple of similarities when I was looking back at that 1970 Knicks team coached by Red Holtzman, a legendary name for most NBA history fans. The similarities between his 1970s Knicks and then the 1994 Rockets and coach Rudy Tomjanovich, from what I remember reading in the past few days, both had the first full season of coaching the year prior to this NBA championship run. When it came to opening the season, the Knicks of 1970 got out to that 22-1 start. The Rockets had their 22-1 start in 1994. And then through the playoff rounds and into the finals, there was a number of similarities. I believe through Game 4 of the NBA Finals, the wins versus losses for each team on opposition courts were also the same as well. So chasing ghosts from decades past.
Interesting. And this was all chasing the other team's ghosts as well.
Symmetry a couple of decades apart. Now, just moving on in terms of the matchups against each other, New York and Houston met once at home and, of course, once on the road back in the 1994 regular season. The Rockets won both times. There was a 94-85 win at Madison Square Garden in early December of 93, and then a 20-point drubbing of the Knicks in Houston in late February of 94. Olajuwon averaged NBA Jam-esque numbers, 33 points and 16.5 rebounds per game in the two contests, and Ewing, by his own lofty standards, was subpar. Could even say sub-pat, I guess. A modest stat line of 12 points and 9.5 rebounds per game. Olajuwon was named the 1994 Most Valuable Player and Defensive Player of the Year. He also won the DPOY in 1993. And the award, for what it's worth, is now named after him, the Akeem Olajuwon Trophy. Dream was also named All-NBA and All-Defensive First Team for good measure. And New York's Charles Oakley was also selected to the All-Defensive First Team.
Oakley was an all-star that year, wasn't he? He was a replacement for
Alonzo Mourning.
Alonzo Mourning, that's right.
Olajuwon was the Rockets' sole Western Conference all-star in 94, but New York had the trio of Ewing, Starks, and Oakley, replacing Alonzo via injury on the Eastern Conference roster.
I think that's our first mention of John Starks. For anyone who does remember this series, he's going to come up a hell of a lot. He's obviously not the headliner when you've got Olajuwon and Ewing, a pair of Hall of Fame dream teamers, but he certainly had his moments, let's say, trying to steal the headlines in this series.
The Rockets entered the finals on an 8-day break. And in contrast, the Knicks only had 2 days off leading into this NBA Finals matchup. A little quick bit of minutiae here for you, mate. Pat Riley was the first player drafted by the Rockets franchise. He was then San Diego Rockets' first pick of the 1967 draft. And then Rudy Tomjanovich, through the 1994 Finals, had been a Rocket the entirety of his pro career. He was a player, then moved to scout, then to assistant coach, and then finally to head coach.
I knew about Rudy T's history with the Rockets, a bit of a regular talking point through those finals and I guess the 95 finals as well. Until I saw your notes, Adam, I had no idea that Pat Riley was originally a Rocket. A fun little quirk, that one. This was the season where Scottie Pippen decided to remove himself from the last play of a playoff game, quite infamously, because he wasn't getting the last shot drawn up for him.
Now, as far as the last play of the game goes, Scottie Pippen was not involved in that play. He asked out of the play. I left him off the floor. That's as much as I'll talk about that, and we have practice tomorrow at 11 o'clock.
Scotty, Phil just said you weren't in because you asked out of the play.
Yeah, pretty much.
That's why you weren't involved in it.
Exactly.
Tony Kukoc hit the winner anyway.
1.8 left, no timeouts left for the Bulls.
Scotty's going to sit here.
If I look for Kukoc here, at 6'11", he's the logical man to shoot over the tough defense.
Myers triggers an inbounds pass. Bob comes into Tony. Look out, it's on line.
Yeah! Bulls win! Bulls win it! Kukoc with the lifesaver!
And it's also the season that the number 1 seeded Sonics in the West got taken down by the 8th seed Denver Nuggets, which led to that iconic scene of Dikembe Mutombo on the floor grasping that basketball like it was a massive cookie that he was about to eat. One of the more enduring images of the 1990s in the NBA.
No doubt about that. The late, great Dikembe saying,
Mutombo embraces the ball and the unlikely upset. One of the great upsets in NBA playoff history.
Incredible moments. Some good, some not so good, depending on who you follow.
Famed moments nonetheless.
The NBA Finals, June the 8th through June 22nd, 1994, New York Knicks versus the Houston Rockets. It was broadcast by NBC Sports. Our commentators, Marv Albert and Matt Gukas, and we had Ahmad Rashad and Hannah Storm on the sidelines. Coaches, we've got Pat Riley of the Knicks and Rudy Tomjanovich of the Rockets. Let's get into game one, mate. It was on June the 8th, New York at Houston.
Just before we get into the game itself, this was a series played out under the old 2-3-2 format where the higher seeded Rockets opened up with 2 games at home, as is traditional. Rather than getting 2 games in New York and then going 1-1-1, the Knicks had 3, 4, and 5 at MSG before the teams returned to the Summit for 6 and 7. It was a controversial way to run a series, probably one that you would more expect to see thought up as a brainstorm these days, where there's a lot more consideration about carbon footprints and the like. It was certainly one where the competitive balance of giving the lower seed more games at home at a certain point of the series was hotly debated. The fact that this was a 2-3-2, that did actually play into the narrative of this series as it got towards the middle of it. Game 1, though, Adam, this was very typical of mid-90s ball, this game. Low scoring, kind of grimy. It certainly didn't have the spacing or speed of today's game, and it also lacked the intricate passing and movement that defined the Lakers and Celtics offenses of the 80s as well. Almost a perfect snapshot of what 90s basketball looked like. We talk about offensive rating these days. We're very stat-driven in 2024. The offensive ratings for these teams, Houston, 91.2, New York, 84.2. Now, those offensive ratings, in Houston's case, that would still be a good probably 15, 16 points lower without looking it up than the worst offense in 2024.
It's miles apart now, isn't it?
It's a different sport.
We'll get to Bob Costas and some words that he had about the way that 2-3-2 format had been working out in recent years.
Still, some gorgeous basketball was played through this series, but you almost have to go into it with the expectation that you're not going to see 2014 Spurs or 2024 Nuggets basketball. It's very, very different. Onto the players themselves. Hakeem had a big one in game 1, 28 and 10, 3 steals, 2 blocks. He was typically brilliant. Otis Thorpe, 14 and 16. He was fantastic. Almost a typical Otis Thorpe game where he was extremely effective, but whisper quiet about how effective he was. Carl Herrera, a little cameo off the bench, 10 points, 5 of 6 from the floor. For the Knicks, Starks had 11 points on 3 of 18 shooting. Oakley was excellent, 12 and 14 for him. Ewing, 23 and 9, but 10 of 26 from the floor. I think it was a case of how he was used as opposed to just he didn't use the ball that well.
It's a nice summation there. The team set final records in this game with just 28 points in the fourth quarter combined and 63 points in the second half. New York trailed the game by as much as 12 points in the final stanza before getting to within 3 points with less than 2 minutes remaining. As we alluded to, the Knicks shot a woeful 12 of 50 from the field in the second half. You mentioned there, Jared, John Starks, him and Derek Harper combined for 6 for 28, 19 points between the two of them, which was not going to get the job done. Houston would win the game 85-78, and they take the 1-0 series lead.
This was a game where, in Houston's case, we saw embryonic stages of what was modern 10 years ago as a 4-out offense. Having to pick your poison with Hakeem Olajuwon. He wasn't as good a passer as Walton or Brad Doherty or either of the Sabonises. He's certainly not as good a passer as Jokic. But he was an effective player in kicking the ball out against a defense that had the illegal defense restrictions that we don't have nowadays. You either double him hard and he kicks it out to this array of shooters. Robert Horry used to play a little bit of 4 for the Rockets as well. So on those occasions, you would genuinely have 4 out. Or you kind of have to go one-on-one and hope that he just misses, because his array of moves, his footwork is quite famously brilliant. But flipping that coin over to the Knicks, you mentioned before, Adam, Hakeem was the 2-time reigning Defensive Player of the Year at this point. I don't know whether they were a little frightened of Hakeem's defense in the block, but they seemed to turn Ewing into a jump shooter, and he had a really nice 15-foot stroke. Fair enough, you could time the release with a sundial, but it was a nice shot. A lot of eschewing traditional low-post play and running him off a lot of low-set double pin downs, which were extremely rare for a big man in those days. He could get open looks from the elbow or fade out to his little patented 15-foot baseline, Jay. He's got a very good midi game, but it took him out of his rhythm a little bit. He used to shoot that jumper almost as a release valve that if his defender laid back to defend him in the post, he could step out and hit that J. It wasn't meant to be the main ingredient in the Ewing cake, so to speak. I honestly think that change in the way that they used him, and I don't know whether it was by design or whether it was just the happenstance of the game, but the way he was used, I think, contributed to his poor shooting. He tended to go to option B rather than option A a lot more.
Great analysis there, mate. You're all over the X's and O's. You've examined this with a fine-tooth comb, which is great to hear. Ewing was definitely great powering towards the basket and doing some sweeping hooks or just barreling his way down in the post. When he's not firing on all cylinders, particularly with his field goal shooting, then that makes it very tough in a defense-oriented series already to carry the load for an entire team that was shooting blanks in terms of John Starks and Derek Harper. This game also doubled as Pat Riley's first loss in a series opener as Knicks coach. He was 8-1 following this loss. I read that a Houston fan was ejected during the game for, quote, yelling obscenities at an official, end quote. He was apparently shown the nearest exit after cursing at referee Jack Madden from the sidelines, who had just whistled a technical foul on Vernon Maxwell, of all people.
Oh, Vernon Maxwell got a tech.
Yeah.
Next thing you'll tell me the sky's blue.
Who would have thought, hey? Anything you'd like to add from this Game 1 matchup here that Houston took 85-78?
New York's rotation, it looked very narrow to me. There wasn't a lot of minutes given out to people on the bench outside of Anthony Mason, who tended to split the minutes at small forward with Charles Smith, and then one of the two of them would play at the 4, and Smith in particular was traditionally a 4 when Oakley would sit. There seemed to be a lot of minutes being given to the main players for the Knicks. And to be honest, the Rockets are a little bit the same. I was 16 years old when this series happened. I couldn't remember how minutes were really doled out, whether there was that consideration of we need to keep this guy with something in the tank for games 2, 3, 4, etc. Anthony Mason shared the minutes at 3 with Charles Smith, and both of them, natural 4s, would fill in for Oakley or Ewing whenever those two hit the bench. But there wasn't a lot of minutes for the Knicks supporting players. Hubert Davis, Greg Anthony barely got off the pine. Houston used their bench a little bit more, but not as much as you would expect these days. And there's no traditional load management in the way we think about it now. Back in 1994, it was a bit more of that masculinity, man up, leave it all on the floor type of thought process. But it did make me think just to keep an eye on how many minutes these guys are playing for the rest of this series, or whether it was just something where it's finals, we just don't trust our 7th, 8th, 9th players.
I've looked for newspaper headlines from either Houston or New York following each of the games. The best newspaper headline that I could see, though somewhat predictable, I guess, came from the Journal News in New York. Rockets burn Knicks in Game 1. See if they get a bit more creative as the series goes on.
Man, that sub-editor needs to be fired. That's awful.
I'll have to use the word best loosely going forwards, perhaps.
We probably should mention here that the reason I'm commenting on these is because I do work for a newspaper as well. So I do actually do some sub-editing from time to time. This kind of falls into my wheelhouse.
Quick side note, understandably, I guess, given that 1993 featured Chicago and Phoenix in the NBA Finals, Michael Jordan, Charles Barkley, and a whole cast of characters, TV ratings from Game 1 of the 94 Finals were way down versus 1993. I found it interesting that NBA Commissioner David Stern, rest in peace, held an impromptu press briefing ahead of Game 2 just to allay some of the concerns. And this stood out to me. Quote, "I like to see hard-fought, close games. If it happens to be tough defensive games, fine. If it's two teams running up and down the floor, that's fine. These things run in cycles." End quote.
Interesting you say that. There was a game later in the series. I want to say Game 6, but I'm not sure. I think it was Bob Costas talking to Stern about how to get more offense into the game because it was very physical and defensive-minded at that era. And he talked about bringing the three-point line in, which came in the very next season. Now, obviously, a well-intentioned experiment that didn't work. It just crowded the space even more. It's interesting that from Game 1 through to the end of the series, he's gone from, this stuff's all cyclical, to here's a solution that we're going to put in. So in the space of 2 weeks, he rather changed his tune, which I found interesting.
David Stern, no nonsense. Whilst he did have a dry sense of humour and quick-witted, he certainly wouldn't muck around in terms of decision-making. That is an interesting contrast. Let's move on to Game 2, Knicks at Rockets, June the 10th.
This was a much more balanced effort from New York. They had 6 players in double figures. Ewing had 16, 7 of 19 from the floor, but Starks had 19, Oak had a 10-10 double-double, Derek Harper 18 points. Starks and Harper, you talked about their woeful shooting in Game 1, Adam. Between them was 7 of 10 from deep in Game 2, so they certainly made up for their lack of production in Game 1. Tactically, one thing I noticed in this game was that New York were almost similar to an embryonic version of what Minnesota do now with Towns guarding the center and Gobert as the backline roamer. They would have Anthony Mason taking Olajuwon and having Ewing playing on Otis Thorpe, who quite clearly isn't going to go too far from the basket anyway. So it allowed Ewing to come in and be that backline shot blocker. I would assume that Mason was given the role because he was built like a cinder block. So Olajuwon was still going to struggle to move him, but he had more speed than Oakley or Ewing or Smith. So he could potentially keep up with all of those little shimmies and shakes that Olajuwon used to put on. Felt like Olajuwon was just a little bit tepid, a little bit hesitant, particularly in the first half when looking to make his moves, just trying to size up how Mason would react. So it was a nice little wrinkle from Riley.
New York would hold on for a 91-83 win, tied the series and took the home court advantage. A great win for the Knicks. It was just the 4th time in 20 playoff games that they shot better than 50% from the field. They were 52.2%. New York did not allow Houston a solitary field goal make in the final 6+ minutes of the 4th quarter, clamping down there on the defensive end, and it led to a victory which was much needed for the Knicks to then head back home with 3 straight on the cards at MSG.
You talk about the Knicks defense. The Rockets had 32 turnovers in this game, Adam. Rudy Tomjanovic had great hair. I'm surprised it didn't turn grey in this game alone. 32 turnovers is appalling.
It's a staggering number.
Here's a quaint little note. The Rockets attempted 22 threes in this game, which was, at the time, a finals record. Seems very quaint, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. I read in one of the recaps that John Starks actually set a record for the most number of three-point attempts in a 7-game series at 50. But today, the number of shots, you'd almost get 22 three-point attempts between teams combined in a quarter.
Oh, absolutely you would. I'm a little bit disappointed that I didn't think of looking up that Starks number because it seems quite obvious. He was always firing up threes in that series. I'm kind of disappointed in myself for missing that, but it does make sense because he clearly just shot the ball every time he got it through this series.
To be fair, Starks does have a great series for the most part, but there was 2 games, game 1, and then perhaps we'll say a later game in the series that he unfortunately for New York fans was off the mark.
I love the tease you've put in there. That's perfect.
Spoiler alerts can't be given 30 years after the fact, I'm afraid. As far as Houston goes in game 2, Olajuwon had 25 points, 7 rebounds. He had 4 assists, 2 steals and 4 blocks. Vernon Maxwell had 20 points. Robert Horry had 11 points and 4 rebounds. Otis Thorpe went for 10 points, 12 boards. And Sam Cassell had 9 points, 4 rebounds, 3 assists and 2 steals, the young rookie for Houston.
You can't mention Cassell without mentioning Kenny the Jet Smith, which I think we're legally obliged to call him Kenny the Jet Smith. I think it's his full legal name. Cassell played with unusual poise for a rookie. It was pretty clear that this kid was going to be really, really good. But at the same time, I knew Kenny Smith was old in this series, but he was aging in dog years. If we go back to another cultural reference from the 90s, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, he almost aged like the guy who chose the wrong chalice. He was just disintegrating before our eyes, the poor bloke.
He chose poorly.
It was fortunate for Houston that they had this rookie who had rare poise and, as we would find out in this series, rather large cojones. I have mentioned in my notes that it was the first time we saw the big balls dance come out.
He definitely rose to the occasion, Mr. Cassell, even as a rook. Hello to Kenny the Jet Smith, if you're listening. The best, inverted commas, best newspaper headline was from the Post-Standard in New York. Following game 2 was Knicks shoot down Rockets. Now, again, perhaps the sub-editor needs a quiet word there, mate.
They're mailing it in.
Trust me, it gets better. We head back to Madison Square Garden. The series is tied at 1.
We mentioned the 2-3-2. The Knicks stealing home court advantage by winning game 2 means that if they take care of business at home, they close out the series. They know that if they do what they need to do, they do not need to travel back to Texas and they can come away with a championship, which must have been a huge thing in their mind. And I dare say it was a big thing in Houston's mind coming into this game that let's not let the Knicks get momentum.
And that's exactly what they had going back for game 3 in New York. Now, during the NBC opener to game 3, referring to the 2-3-2 format that you were talking about earlier, Jared, Bob Costas talked about
some cosmic force at work that has stood home court advantage on its head for the last several NBA Finals. Since 1989, when the Pistons swept the Lakers, the road team is 19-9 in the Finals. Even more astoundingly, the team playing on the road for the middle 3 games is 12-2 during this same 5-year period. So what a set of 3 games it figures to be on this floor. And what a week in New York. Ewing and Olajuwon, Messier and Boré, Marvin Matt. Let's go to him courtside. Marvelous.
All right, Bob, and Pavel Boré was asking for you just the other day.
It did make me deep dive into some of the narrative around the 2-3-2 at the time. The arguments for were very much outweighed by the arguments against. I tend to agree. At no point should a lower seed have more home games played in a series. It kind of defeats the purpose of winning a higher seed in the first instance. I did like that Bob Costas has mixed the word cosmic in when talking about the Rockets as well. New York sub-editors could learn a little bit from the great man.
Him and Marv Albert particularly were just fantastic with their quick wit, comebacks and one-liners. Costas, he surely meant that.
Prime Marv, we don't need to say anything about Prime Marv. He was the GOAT.
Yep, 100% fact. Now, game 3, Rockets at Knicks, June the 12th, happened to be Marv Albert's birthday, just quietly there. Happy birthday, Marv. Houston trying to stop New York winning 3 straight to take the NBA title.
We'll run through the box scores. Hakeem, 21, 11 boards, 7 assists. and 7 blocks. He was everywhere in this one.
Not far off a quadruple double.
Yeah, you've just triggered a little memory in me. When I was researching this was the season that David Robinson had the 34, 10, 10, and 10.
David Robinson just taking over this ball game. Blocking shots, getting to the line, scoring, rebounding, you name it.
David Robinson with the slam back.
I thought he was going to grab the top of the backboard and hang on that. My goodness.
Not only a triple-double, but now a quadruple-double for David Robinson.
Unbelievable.
To the best of my knowledge, Adam, that's the last time anyone had a quadruple-double in the NBA was David Robinson 30 years ago. That's a little non sequitur anyway. We just mentioned Sam Cassell, 15 points in 22 minutes, 3 of 3 from beyond the arc. Derek Harper was outstanding in this game for New York. 21 points, 3 threes, 4 steals. He gave Kenny Smith nightmares in this game. He was excellent. Ewing had 18 and 13, shot 9 of 29 from the floor, which was not great, but also 7 blocks. So the Knicks really struggled in the first quarter. Houston came out cooking. Maxwell, in particular, Mad Max was superb in the first, but Ewing really locked up Olajuwon in that first quarter. He blocked him twice, stripped him once, kept pushing him away from the block so that his moves were just that foot and a half further out. He did all the little things that you needed to do in that first quarter. But unfortunately, he was really the only Knick to fire in the first quarter. Harper got better as the game went on. It was a shame because if the rest of the team could have drawn from what Ewing gave them in the first, I think they might have won this one.
The final score for Game 3, Houston holding on for a 93-89 win, thus a 2-1 lead in the series just after New York claimed the home court advantage.
I do want to get to the controversy at the end of this game, which was, again, something I'd completely forgotten about. A little sidebar here. It's Madison Square Garden. It's New York. There's always famous faces in the crowd. So they scanned through. There was Spike Lee, Daryl Hannah, JFK Jr., Donald Trump, and Marla, his ex-wife. The one that jumped out at me was Jack Nicholson was in the crowd. Apparently he was in New York shooting some movie. I can't remember what it was. Kind of discombobulating to see Jack Nicholson front and center at a game on the opposite coast.
Not in LA for a change, sitting courtside at the Forum. You mentioned Donald Trump there. There was quite a bizarre moment just before the second half got underway in Game 3. Donald Trump interrupted Marv.
Oh, yes. That was so strange.
Very strange. Donald Trump interrupted Marv while he was chatting to Matt Gukas, and then they exchanged pleasantries, inverted commas. Both Donald and his ex-wife, Marla, greeted Marv and wished him well for his birthday. I think it was a setup on behalf of NBC and Bob Costas particularly.
It's an incredible week at Madison Square Garden, the NBA Finals, then Game 7 for the Stanley Cup on Tuesday. And how appropriate that Marv Albert would be working an NBA Finals game on this, his birthday. And we can't tell you how pleased we are that all of you folks, millions of you around the country, can be with us tonight as we celebrate for the 8th consecutive year Marv's 43rd birthday. Mazel tov, Marvelous.
Bob, thank you. Thank you so much. The staff doing its research, obviously, Matt. I'm just emotionally crushed by this. It should be pointed out.
43.
Oh, it's your good friend Donald Trump, Matt.
Donald,
yes.
My business partner.
What does it say? Walk on. It's very nice. Marla, thank you very much. Thank you.
Were you around for the last?
Thank you. I told you never to bother me during the telecast. Very, very embarrassing. Thank you. Very nice. The staff very well prepared. Well, as we were saying,
Donald quite famously averse to free publicity. In 1994, you just went, oh, it's Donald Trump. But knowing what we know 3 decades later, before we go too far down that rabbit hole, teams are trading baskets late. Harper hits an 18-footer to give the Knicks the lead. Cassell answers with a 3 from an Olajuwon pass. Of course, he runs off doing the big balls for a Knicks timeout because Cassell's going to Cassell. That left Houston leading by 3 with seconds remaining. The last play of this game was affected by a rule that it's not even that I'd forgotten about. I actually didn't even realise this rule existed in the NBA. When the three-pointer was introduced in 1980, and this seems ridiculous, but there was no change made to the number of free throws awarded if you were fouled while shooting. if you were fouled next to the basket, you got 2 free throws. If you were fouled shooting beyond the 3-point line, if you made it, you got a 4-point play opportunity. But if you missed, you didn't get 3 free throws. You only got 2, which I was flabbergasted at when I was reading it. But that directly affects this last play. Starks gets the ball and from a Ewing screen finds just enough space to fire up the 3. Olajuwon flies out. He doesn't block the shot, but he does foul Starks. Now remember, Houston are up 3, and Starks has tried to tie it with the 3-point bomb. He only gets 2 free throws because he gets fouled. So there's no chance for him to tie this game. He's forced to miss the second deliberately to give New York a chance, but Houston get the rebound and ends up winning the game. This was one of those what could have been for the Knicks if the rules were A, modernised, but B, just fair. That would send it to OT. Does the crowd get the Knicks home and they lead 2-1 with 2 more home games? That was, to me, the genuine sliding doors moment of this entire series.
Great pickup, and also that reminds me of the 1986 playoffs, Michael Jordan's 63-point performance at Boston Garden.
Jordan with a 3-pointer right side, rimming, no! He got fouled! Did he call it foul? He did! Ed Middleton called it foul on Kevin McHale. Michael Jordan shoots 2 with no time left.
Jordan had to make both free throws to then force overtime, which became the double overtime classic.
Jordan's free throw, rimming, good. Michael shooting for the tie with no time left. 14,890 hooted up. Jordan shooting into a sea of waving arms. Overtime! Overtime in Boston Garden!
Again, had that rule been 3 free throws for being fouled on a missed 3-point attempt, significant moments in NBA history could certainly have been flipped on their side.
The crappy rule giveth, the crappy rule taketh away.
Absolutely did. John Starks ended up with 20 points in this game and had 9 assists. Anthony Mason had 10 points and Charles Oakley 7 points but 10 rebounds. The Knicks down 2-1 by virtue of that 93-89 decision Houston's way. Newsday, New York, SAM missile. SAM is capitalised, surface to air missile. Is that any better?
That's clever. I got to admit, I don't mind that one. Stark improvement from game 1 and 2.
No pun intended on Starks, of course.
Oh, I completely missed that.
I'm always listening. A classic tidbit as well from the Daily News in New York, the Tony Awards, Excellence in Broadway Theatre.
From the Gershwin Theater in New York City, the League of American Theaters and Producers and the American Theater Wing welcome you to the 1994 Tony Awards.
Gary Smith, the director, he promised to keep the audience informed of the Knicks-Rockets Game 3. He'd appear during the commercial breaks to advise the Knicks were losing, and then at around 9:40 p.m. he said, quote, "Sorry folks, they're down by 12, end quote. There were boos from the audience, and then from elsewhere in the crowd he heard the following, "Shut up, we don't want to hear the score. Keep quiet, we're taping this." That didn't stop him from the running commentary during the breaks, and then obviously eventually he announced that the Knicks lost that pivotal Game 3. Fans not happy, but it just shows where we were in the 1990s, recording that on VHS tape. Beautiful stuff.
Do we need to explain the concept of taping things to the younger listeners?
Look, you never know. Deriding him for telling them what was happening in the game in real time.
Poor guy. He's just trying to help.
Maybe he needs an award for worst director to be handed to him.
Worst cameo.
True. One other quick aside. June the 14th of 1994 was Game 7 of the NHL Stanley Cup Finals between Vancouver and New York. Now, the sport scheduling gods were very kind to one Marv Albert. The series decider for the NHL Finals was at Madison Square Garden, and Marv called the first and third periods of the game on WFAN Radio New York.
With 1 and 6/10 seconds, puck is dropped, McTavish controls, and it's all over. The New York Rangers have won the Stanley Cup. Something that most people did not think they would hear in their lifetime. And they are going wild here at Madison Square Garden.
The Rangers' first win since 1940 in the Stanley Cup. So I thought that was a little interesting side note there that Marv got to call the game between Games 3 and 4 of the NBA Finals.
Now, if we want this pod to go 4 hours, I'm a massive, massive New York Rangers fan. I have written many articles about hockey, and in particular the New York Rangers. I go down to games in Melbourne, have a skate beforehand, take the kids, take my parents who love their hockey. I could go on a long, long time. So it's probably best we just leave it there.
That's fantastic, mate. I'm glad that I included that as a little aside there. I didn't know you had a love for hockey. The only one I can tell you with confidence that was on the Rangers at that time is Mark Messier.
Oh, yeah. I reckon I could name all 20 players that dressed for Game 7 still. I'm an obsessive hockey fan. I love the sport.
Now let's move on to Game 4, Houston at New York. It was on June the 15th.
If you'll indulge me, the first thing that grabbed me was that Mark Messier was in the crowd 24 hours after winning the Stanley Cup and breaking a 54-year drought. If I was the captain of a championship-winning professional sports side breaking a 5.5-decade drought, I don't think I'd be in any condition to be in public, let alone Madison Square Garden, within 24 hours. I'd still be in my uniform about 30 beers in. Credit to captain, my captain, Mark Messier, for actually being able to front up in that scenario, because sure as hell I wouldn't have.
And also you could say that Messier could have been looking quite messier.
Ah, there it is. There it is.
Been waiting for
it. He's been holding on to that one.
I knew the spelling would come in handy one day.
On the hardwood, before we turn this into a hockey pod. Game 2, when the Knicks won, 6 double-figure scorers. Oakley had 16 and 20. Ewing had 16 and 15, although again shot really poorly, 8 of 28. Starks had 20. Derek Harper had 5 3-pointers in amongst 21 points. The big names all stepped up again. It wasn't just Ewing-centric offense. And that would tell a story for the series. When the supporting scorers did score, the Knicks looked really, really good. When they didn't, the Knicks just didn't have enough firepower.
New York would hold on 91-82, and they tied the series at 2 games apiece.
By contrast, Houston was pretty much Olajuwon or nothing. 32 points, 14 of 20 from the floor, 8 boards and 5 blocks. His game score, according to Basketball Reference, was an even 28. Huge, huge score for a singular game. The Knicks were fired up for this one. It was clearly a must-win after the heartbreak of Game 3. Oakley, as he often did, set the tone, a pair of little mid-range jumpers, some really physical work on the offensive glass in particular. I did note Sam Cassell came in less than 6 minutes into the first quarter for Kenny Smith. So it was clear that Rudy T was starting to trust the rookie a bit more than his veteran. Straight away, Cassell hits a 3. First possession is in the game. It had the right impact. A very different effort from New York, much more balanced, much more team-oriented offense. And, of course, their defense remained as physical as it always does.
A tantalising look ahead for both teams as it was going to go either 6 or 7 games.
I don't think it's a coincidence that the next win they had was another balanced effort. A little interesting note here on the Cassell-Smith dance that Tom Yanovich was having to play. Smith played 19 minutes in this game. Cassell played 30. It was quite clear that the pendulum of trust, for want of a better way to put it, was moving towards Cassell in a real, real hurry. One thing I was waiting for in this series, Adam, through those first 4 games, was for the Knicks to get overtly physical. Like, they always played good, hard physical D, but we know that every now and again it wasn't quite bad boy Pistons level, but those mid-90s Knicks could step over that line into goonery occasionally. It really took until probably late in the third quarter for the Knicks to quite literally play the hits. Horry managed to get to the bucket and he's tackled by Mason and lands on his hip.
Here's Horry. Oh, look out. Oh, he went down hard. Robert Horry slamming to the floor.
Let's go. Come on. Today, that'd be a flagrant 2. Someone's getting kicked out. Mason got the flagrant 1. The tackle did do what it was intended to do, though, not so much hurting Horry, but it sparked the Knicks. They were down by 6, but a little 5-zip run at the end of the quarter sees them trail by 1 going into the last. And from there, it was all Olajuwon. The Rockets had 21 points in the last quarter. Hakeem had 14 of them, 5 of 6 shooting and 4 of 4 from the free throw line. He got Ewing fouled out. He was just superb in that last quarter.
He was all world. 32 points, 8 boards, 3 assists, if you don't mind, and then 5 blocks. Just incredible. And then to come through so big in the fourth quarter. Speaking of Kenny Smith there for a moment and his role as the series progressed, looking back at Basketball Reference right now as we speak, and in this particular game, 19 minutes that you mentioned, he was 0 of 2 from the field, 0 points, versus Cassell, who was happy to throw up the ball, 3 of 11 from the field and 1 of 4 from deep, but just seemed to exude so much more confidence. It's worth noting that Kenny was brought up in the Bronx in New York, so he has ties to New York City. The only thing I will say is that being a veteran, Kenny Smith, he may come up with some goods later in the series. You never know, mate. The best newspaper headline I could come up with after the Knicks 91-82 victory, tying the series at 2, the reporter Dispatch in New York, Rockets launcher misfires in Game 4. What are your thoughts on that one?
It's there to be said. There has to be a Rockets pun in there somewhere. It's pretty hard to put a pun on a Knickerbocker, but a Rocket's much easier to do. I'm really excited to move on to Game 5.
Thanks for listening. I welcome your interaction with the show. Tap the microphone icon on my website to send me a voicemail. Suggest discussion topics or guests you'd like to hear conversations with. Worldwide, the show has 206 ratings on Apple Podcasts with an average of 4.9 stars with 102 reviews across all providers. Thanks for your continued support. If you add a review, I'd love to read it out on a future episode. Your ratings and reviews are one of the best ways to support the podcast. If you enjoy the show, please tell your basketball-loving friends about it. Word-of-mouth recommendations are truly worth their weight in gold. Stay up to date with my podcast and subscribe to my free NBA history newsletter. You'll receive exclusive details on upcoming episodes, future guests to appear on the show, and more. Sign up via my website or simply email me, inallairness@gmail.com. You can follow my show in various ways. Search In All Airness, 3 words, on your listening app of choice. The show is available on most platforms. Check the podcast archive for plenty more episodes with a great range of guests. Join me next time for another edition of the show.